Or
we do
oh yeah. You don't want to see it, but nonetheless. Oh yeah. I understand this.
Ready to go? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Monsoon Twilight Investor Briefing. Glad we're getting a bit closer to the twilight with these briefings. Today we've got two drug development companies that are going to present. Both are close to $500 million companies, and I think they're both, things go well, chance of becoming billion-dollar companies. The first company is Opthea, which you may well know about. Megan Baldwin is going to present on Opthea, and she's going to talk a little bit about a particular subset of patients from one of their trials. Opthea is currently conducting a trial with seeking to enroll about 2,000 patients with wet AMD. So without any more time, we'll please welcome Megan Baldwin. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone in person. This is actually the first time I've spoken in person for some time, and it's definitely the first time I've spoken about this data set, actually. So I'm pretty excited about this. It is a very interesting data set that we showed efficacy of our molecule OPT302 in a particular group of wet age-related macular degeneration patients. So for those of you who are not as familiar as some of us with the wet AMD disease process, it is a disease that affects the back of the eye, it affects the retina, and it's characterized by abnormal vascular growth at the back of the eye that results in chronic and often very rapid loss of visual acuity. And it tends to affect people over the age of 50 and is the most common cause of blindness in the elderly population. It does progress quite rapidly if it's left untreated. And at the moment, really, the treatments for this disease are really specific for one particular class of therapies, which are called the VEGF-A inhibitors. This is what the VEGF-A inhibitor class of therapies actually look like. They block a molecule that's involved in blood vessel development and involved in making vessels grow and leak, such that you get fluid at the back of the eye and a wet AMD lesion that then affects the visual acuity of the patient. And if it's left untreated, that can go on for many, many years. However, if you are to receive therapy for this disease, they are typically inhibitors of VEGF-A, and some of those are listed here in the yellow. The most common standard of care treatments are drugs like Lucentis and Eylea, blocking VEGF-A's interaction with that first receptor. And what that does is actually suppress the vessel growth. Unfortunately, however, this class of agents is not 100% effective, and many, many patients actually have a suboptimal response to those standard of care treatments, such that their vision continues to decline over time, or there is insufficient improvement in their visual acuity, such that there's still further room for vision gains in order to improve the quality of life for the patient. That's where OPT302 comes in. This is our trap molecule. It's an injection into the eye, just as all of the other standard of care treatments are. These are injections into the eye. It mops up VEGF-C and D. And in doing so, when it's used together with the existing standard of care treatment, results in a much broader blockade of all of those processes that can cause the disease itself. In addition, this also shuts down a very important mechanism that can lead to suboptimal clinical efficacy in patients. So we're basically targeting a mechanism of resistance to the current standard of care treatments, which are blockbuster agents in themselves. So the problem with this existing therapy class of agents is that the majority of patients actually do not respond optimally. Over 45% of patients continue to have a lack of visual acuity gain, and the majority continue to have fluid at the back of the eye. And this is really because the disease processes are much more complicated than just blocking VEGF-A, and that's where OPT302 fits in. Right now, physicians can just switch patients from one therapy to another that all do the same things. By having OPT302 come through as a novel differentiated therapy, we can be the next transformative step to actually improve the response to treatments and then have patients actually see better. This is obviously a very, very large market opportunity. The existing standard of care treatments, the two that I pointed out, Lucentis and Eylea, generated revenues in excess of $12 billion annually right now, and that's growing over time because the population is aging over time as well. We have the opportunity to tap into that entire market because we're not competing with those therapies we're adding on to. And in fact, biosimilars are coming out that will start to replace these therapies, and we're very complementary to biosimilars entering the market as well. I know there's some misunderstandings with biosimilars in this space. We are not competitive with biosimilars. Biosimilars actually help us with our price point in the market, and we can add on to them and tap into a $12 billion, at least a $12 billion commercial opportunity. So this is the clinical development program that we've conducted to date. We've conducted a wet AMD phase 1/2 study, a large phase 2b clinical trial, which is the topic of today's discussion. This is the study which was a randomized controlled statistically powered study, which we showed statistically and clinically that OPT302, when it's added on to the standard of care treatment, actually gives patients better vision. And we're the only company in the world right now that has a current clinical development program ongoing that's actually demonstrated superior efficacy over and above any of the existing blockbuster agents that are currently available. Today, I'm going to focus on a particular subset in that group. I've spoken about the overall data before, which was the primary endpoint of the study. But what we did is we dived into that data in a lot more detail, and we found that there were certain groups of patients, and typically they are the patients that don't do as well on standard of care treatments like Eylea and Lucentis, which actually speaks to us having a differentiated mechanism of action. Right now, we're progressing with very large phase 3 clinical trials, as Mark described earlier. They will recruit 2,000 patients overall around the world. But today I'm going to focus on this very interesting subset of wet AMD patients. So the subset I'm talking about is a wet AMD form or lesion type called polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. What this means is that the vessels at the back of the eye that normally grow in AMD are typically just a network of vessels. In this particular form of wet AMD, they grow as polyps at the back of the eye and they're highly leaky. And it's a particular form of wet AMD that tends to be less responsive to standard of care treatment, as I said. So there's a very, very large unmet medical need for this condition. This form of wet AMD is particularly prevalent in Asian populations. It is the most common form of wet AMD in Asian populations, and consequently, it is often said to be the most prevalent form of wet AMD globally, but yet it's not served as well with the current standard of care treatments. The two targets that we hit with our molecule VEGF-C and D, however, are particularly implicated in the progression of PCV wet AMD lesion. What you can see here in the table, if you just put your eyes onto the orange and the blue bars there, you can see that in the control bar, which is the third or fourth on the right there, on the far right, the coloured, you can see that's the level of VEGF-D and VEGF-A in the eye in these patients, in control patients, in healthy people in the eye. When you look at wet AMD on the left there and PCV, you can see that both of those parts of the pathway are significantly higher than what you see in healthy volunteers. And that actually indicates that the targets that we hit are actually very much elevated and high in these particular disease types. And that really does implicate our part of the pathway in the progression of that wet AMD lesion. So we conducted quite a large phase 2b clinical trial. You can see it here. This is the design of it. I won't go into a lot of detail. It was a 366 patient study, all in treatment naive patients. And patients either received a control, which was Lucentis or ranibizumab, as it's technically called, or they received our drug with Lucentis, either at a low dose or at a high dose. And then we looked to see the benefit of visual acuity gain compared to those patients that just received standard of care alone. This is what the patients look like, and I'm drawing your attention to the orange bar there. About 18% of our patients that were recruited into that clinical trial actually had PCV lesions. What was very interesting, if you look at the grey bar here, this is the change in vision or visual acuity in patients after 6 months of treatment. The grey bar represents how well they did when they received standard of care therapy. And you can see that they only received about 7 letters of visual acuity gain. So that's about a little bit over a line gain of vision after they received 6 months of regular monthly treatment with the current standard of care treatment. In the dark blue bar, what you see there is the efficacy or the amount of letters that a patient could see once they received our therapy after 6 months of treatment together with the standard of care. And we can see there, we almost doubled the response. Now, it is a small subgroup of patients, but what this does show us is that it was statistically significant with a p-value of 0.02. So we hit significance in the comparison, and we saw a 6.7 letter further benefit over and above how well a patient could see if they just stayed on standard of care treatment. This is particularly interesting because it is a very large commercial opportunity. It's highly prevalent in the Asian population, which is very much an untapped market for us. And the fact that these patients don't actually respond very well to standard of care treatment. But let me tell you a little bit about the other observations we made in these patients as well. In the first 3 graphs here, we're looking at the patients on the left that received over 3 lines of visual acuity gain, and we increased that proportion. The patients that received over 10 letters or 2 lines of gain were also increased, and the patients that received over 1 line of gain were also increased. So anyone that gained actually gained a lot more when they received our therapy. On the right-hand side here, this is the proportion of patients that actually achieved a visual acuity benefit when they received our drug that achieved being able to legally drive status in the United States. And you can see there only 25% on the standard of care treatment actually received that visual acuity benefit, and we increased it almost to 60% of patients that could actually hit a visual acuity that was sufficient for being able to legally drive. So that was very exciting. We also prevented vision loss. So what is very unfortunate in this disease is patients receive therapy, many of them actually continue to receive therapy, but may actually continue to lose vision. We prevented that by and large. We saw no one in our treatment group that actually lost 3 lines or 2 lines of vision, and of only a very, very small proportion. And we reduced that proportion of the patients that lost 5 letters or 1 line. We also reduced the anatomy at the back of the eye. So what we're looking at here is how thick the tissue is, and the thickness actually reflects how much fluid is in the back of the tissue of the eye. We reduced that when we had our therapy on board, and we also reduced the proportion of patients that had subretinal fluid. You can see it's markedly reduced there, and the proportion of patients that had intraretinal fluid. So overall, we're affecting visual acuity, we're reducing fluid, and what we're also doing is regressing the lesion. We're having an effect on the vessels. We're trimming them down and actually reducing the lesion size quite profoundly compared to the standard of care therapy in this treatment group as well. So the key takeaways that we can talk about really from our PCV subgroup analysis is that this is a highly prevalent population of wet AMD patients, and it is a very difficult form of wet AMD to treat with the current available treatments. It's very common in Asian populations, and therefore is a very large commercial opportunity. And we have demonstrated a very nice responsiveness of these PCV patients to our treatment. We've shown an additional 6.7 letter gain, which is over a line gain of visual acuity. We've shown a greater proportion of patients actually gain an impressive level of vision, with 15, 10 or 5 letters of visual acuity gain being much more common when they received OPT-302. More patients achieved 20/40 or better vision, which is required for driving. Fewer patients lost vision, and we saw improved anatomical changes at the back of the eye, suggesting fluid was also being reduced, which actually helps to normalise the tissue at the back of the eye as well. Importantly, when you're injecting something into the eye, you want a very clean safety profile. And what we've seen recently is with some of the large pharmaceutical companies and their new therapies that have come through, they've seen high levels of inflammation that has really upset their commercial opportunity and commercial launch of their products. We have not seen any concerns with inflammation in the eye with our drug. It is a very comparable standard or safety profile to the standard of care treatment. So that is a real differentiation point for our medicine here. We are conducting further studies of PCV. We're recruiting PCV patients into our phase 3, but we're also talking with a number of clinical trial sites in the Asian region in order to potentially start a specific PCV study in wet AMD populations. Just very briefly, I want to tell you a little bit about the wet AMD large study. This is a global registrational study. This is the final stage of clinical development that you need to achieve in order to submit for marketing authorization so you can launch your product and start to make it available generally around the world for sale and for the treatment of patients. These are large registrational studies that we have interacted with the FDA, European medicines agencies, and currently have open in over 25 countries around the world, and we're actively recruiting patients. We expect to read out this registrational program in the middle of 2024. And it is a very large study in order to effectively demonstrate that OPT-302 administered with standard of care gives patients a much better vision outcome. So look out for our progress with that study. It's an important late stage clinical trial program that then enables us to tap into a multi-billion-dollar market opportunity. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to take questions now or at the conclusion of today's talks.
We've got time for questions now. Are there any questions from the audience? If you're online and you do want to ask a question, there's a Q&A box. You can just submit your questions online and I'll receive those. I'll start first. Megan, what do you think about the emergence of biosimilars? Is that a good thing or a bad thing for your potential drug that's approaching the market?
Yeah, so for people in the audience, biosimilars are basically copies of the marketed therapies. Our drug's different to those marketed therapies, and it's different to biosimilars. So the entry of biosimilars into the market effectively just reduces the overall pricing pressure for insurers or payers, particularly in the United States. So it actually helps us. We're complementary to whatever therapy, however it's presented, that targets VEGF-A, we're complementary to that. So we can add on, whether it's a biosimilar, whether it's an approved agent. We've designed our studies to get a broad label that supports that. And being able to do that with a cheaper version of those therapies means that we have a better opportunity of pricing our therapy at a higher value as well, which is important for a new novel differentiated product as well.
So is there the possibility that you might be looking at doing a deal with a biosimilar company?
There's always a possibility to do that. I think one of the real drivers for us to do that would be the potential to get a biosimilar into Opthea and then actually co-formulate, put both our OPT-302 molecule together with a biosimilar into the one vial, and then administer both drugs through the same injection into the eye. You can imagine that such a co-formulated product would then be the preferred choice for physicians, and it would then be one injection to deliver a better, more efficacious, a better working therapy to improve vision in patients for sure.
What about doing any type of a commercial deal? Is that when's the time that you look at doing that? Is that an ongoing discussion, or is it once you've finished recruitment into your phase 3s, or are they all waiting for the data to come out?
Certainly some would like to see phase 3 data, but there is definitely others that see the opportunity of tapping into our opportunity now, which is a way of kind of getting in early and not needing to wait for, you know, the inevitable increase in valuation that would come on the back of top line data. So we're open to those conversations now, but also recognise that we have a multi-billion-dollar projected forecast here with the success of a phase 3 clinical trial with our drug. So we really want to, right now we retain 100% of the economics of the asset. It's great to be an Australian company taking an asset like that forward and knowing that we're the only company out there that's got a VEGF-C/D inhibitor. But we recognise if you do a deal with the right partner, you can actually accelerate your launch and actually tap into new areas around the world that perhaps will be less efficient if you stick it on your own. So it's an equation that we'll do as we progress conversations for sure. And
with the opportunity for, is it PCV?
Yes.
PCV. And starting a trial there, is there the potential that you'll cut out a segment of the market and potentially do a deal in Asia for that particular application?
That data has definitely seen us become on the radar with companies that have very much an Asian or a Chinese or a Japanese focus. There are many pharmaceutical companies, I think, out there that like to partner specifically for their own population where there is a specific and well-defined unmet medical need. And I think that is what is really exciting a lot of those companies that really do have the footprint in those regions. So I definitely feel that there's a big opportunity there for licensing deals in the long run, but more importantly also to offer patients the opportunity to actually do better and respond better, and we can do that through multiple ways.
So with the PCV indication, particularly that subset, is that something you've pressed the button on in terms of doing a trial there? Are you committing to doing that, or are you considering at this stage?
We're considering at this stage. We're in the planning phases and identification of clinical trial sites and collaborators. There's certainly a large level of interest from some of the leading Asian groups in Asia and Singapore particularly. And that's something that we'd like to be able to trigger in the short term. But right now, you know, the pivotal phase 3 clinical trials does take up a lot of the resources focus of the company, and we're really laser focused on delivering that because that's the big opportunity worldwide.
And so for your major phase 3 studies, how's recruitment going there, and what have been the challenges during the pandemic?
Yeah, so we started our recruitment in the pandemic, and we're still going in the pandemic as we always anticipated we would be. And I think looking back after a period of a number of months, things that weren't necessarily obvious that at the time, but looking back, you can kind of see there was a generalized slowdown in patient movement. Really, one of the big things I think is staffing availability. I think everyone's screaming out, you know, restaurants and all the rest of it, but people just having enough people on site and not disrupted in terms of their site visits and their time to actually get the paperwork done to start is something that in retrospect we've seen some challenges with, but we're definitely also seeing worldwide now the world come out of that kind of phase as well. But it did retrospectively, looking back, it has impacted us to a degree. Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much, Megan.
Thanks very much.
I was given some notes here beforehand, which I didn't look at. Sorry about that, already. I was meant to introduce myself. I'm Mark Parhash from BioShares. Just also, if you're interested in your biotech stocks, we've got the BioShares Biotech Summit in Albury next month, 11th and 12th of May. I think we're going to be our largest one yet. We will have about 200 people there, 25 biotech companies presenting. So have a look at our website for details. And now I'm going to welcome our next speaker, and I should give you a background and do this properly. So next speaker is from Neuren Pharmaceuticals. It's Jon Pilcher. Jon started at Neuren as CFO in 2013, and in 2020 became the CEO. He was previously at Acrux, brought 3 drugs to market at Acrux. They've done a licensing deal at Neuren. Their lead drug candidate looks like it's going to be filed for approval mid this year by their partner Arcadia. So I'd like to welcome Jon Pilcher. Thanks, Jon.
Thank you, Mark. Also, thank you, Monsoon and FB Rice, and thank you all for being here today. It's quite amazing to be physically talking to someone rather than on screen. So thank you, appreciate it. Verity, I need our slides. So I'd love to talk about Opthea, but I probably wouldn't do it justice. Oh, okay. You think it'll go forward?
Oh, there's my background slide.
Yeah,
That's really good data, by the way.
I'm giving you a free hit. Yeah? There we go. Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay, so just have to, as always, just remind you that there are some forward-looking statements in the slides, and some of the things I say are subject to risks and uncertainties. So I'm going to start by just looking at what's happened over the last year to our stock, and you know, we're in the happy position that our stock price is about 3 times what it was 12 months ago, and of course a lot of that period has been a bear market for biotech, particularly the last 6 months here. And it's for a very good reason. We had a massive catalyst in December with a phase 3 trial success, which greatly de-risked the whole business. But I think there's a tendency to think that therefore we haven't been affected by the bear market, whereas I'd argue yes we have, because I don't believe that we've gone as high as we should have done after that result. So if you look at our share price versus the valuations of the range of analysts, and that's the risk-adjusted valuations of what we're worth today, we're still well short of that. So I'd argue we're still undervalued. However, much more exciting and important than that is that we've got a series of catalysts over the next 18 months that can take us to a whole different level. And that's certainly what I want to take through with you today. Final thing I'll just mention on this slide is that from a financial point of view, we're very well funded. So we had 37 million cash at our last reporting date, end of December, which is plenty to fund everything that I'm going to talk to you about going forward. So for those of you not familiar with Neuren, I just want to give you just a quick sketch of what we do, what is our mission. So we're trying to treat, using 2 new drugs, trying to treat 6 different serious neurological disorders. They emerge in early childhood, have a terribly debilitating impact, massive burden on the patients and their families for life. There are no approved medicines, so there's huge unmet need here, and Neuren's business is all about trying to do something for those patients and their families. It's interesting, they're all caused by completely different genetic mutations, and yet clinically it looks so similar, and it's this terrible range of problems affecting just about every aspect of life. So, walking, talking, breathing, sleeping, hand use, seizures, GI problems, just, a range of everything. And that's because underlying them all is a problem where the branch-like connections between the neurons in the brain don't form properly in development, and therefore signaling is not getting through properly, and that governs just about everything that's happening in your body. So that's the issue, that's the underlying issue that we're trying to solve with our drugs. And one important thing for these particular patient populations, it's very patient-friendly medicine. So it's a liquid formulation. It's not like a syrup, more like sort of a cordial that they drink twice a day. So it's a very patient-friendly way of taking the medicine. So that's what we do, and where the program is today. So 2 drugs, trofinetide is partnered with Opthea Pharmaceuticals, a Nasdaq listed company, for North America only. So Neuren holds on to the rest of world rights. And our second drug, NNZ-2591, we hold on to global rights. So the Rett Syndrome program for trofinetide is the one where we had our phase 3 success. So it's now finished development and is about to start the regulatory phase, i.e. the FDA approval phase that I'll talk more about in a second. And then our second drug, about to start 4 different phase 2 trials in 4 different indications. We've just got FDA approval to start 3 of them. One important thing to understand about all of these programs is they all have orphan drug designation. And one big benefit of that is that you get protection against generics, never mind what happens to your patents. So 7.5 years in the US, 12 years in Europe, 10 years in Japan, the regulators won't approve a generic, even if your patents get challenged. The whole orphan drug business model is favourable price, less competition, more favourable regulatory environment. So you're not trying to compete with big companies here, you're trying to take a leadership position in these markets and solve a problem where there's no solution today. So where are we today? So the first thing is, again, it's phase 3 results. So in December, Opthea announced what were robustly positive results. They were 2 efficacy endpoints, co-primary, so both of them had to be positive. It wasn't enough for one to be positive. And they both were very robustly positive. So that means Opthea can now move forward to file the new drug application with the FDA that they're going to do in the middle of this year. And that there's potential for approval in the first quarter of 2023. I'll talk more about that timeline in a second. Now that's going to open up a large amount of revenue for Neuren. If the product gets to market, then we would receive 115 million Australian dollars over 2022 and 2023. And that's nothing to do with sales, just if the product gets on the market. We then, on top of that, get double-digit percentage royalties on the net sales. The other thing that opens up for us is the rest of the world. I mentioned that we hold on to rights outside North America. So we've got a lot of partnering interest from companies for other countries. And then the final position we're in at the moment is that we have the second drug that we're going after, indications that are 5 times the size of Rett Syndrome. And we're fully funded to get to phase 2 data in those indications. So that's the position we're in at the moment. Fantastic position. But if you're new to Neuren and thinking about the future, then these are the 3 sort of pillars of what's going to take us to that next level that I talked about. So the first one is the economics of the Opthea deal for North America. and I'll go through them in a second. The second thing is partnering outside North America for Rett syndrome. And then the third thing is to get phase 2 data across these 4 indications for NNZ-2591. So these are these 3 pillars that are all combining to drive the value over the next 18 months. And if you then sort of drill that down into actual events, well, this is the series of events that are going to come, and there's some big ones here. So there's filing the NDA, approval of the NDA, partnering deal outside North America, phase 2 results. You know, these are real serious milestones coming. So this is our roadmap for the next 18 months to make sure we execute perfectly against this. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the phase 3 program and more the what happens from here in the regulatory process. So Cadia submit the NDA mid-year. What happens is the FDA has 60 days to accept the application. When they do that, that triggers our first milestone payment. We then get 6 months of review time instead of the usual 10 months because orphan drugs get priority review. So it's a shorter review from the FDA, and all of that means that we could get approval in the first quarter of 2023. Now, we in Acadia feel very good about what they're going to present to the FDA as the overall data package. They've already conducted 2 pre-NDA meetings with the FDA and got very good alignment and understanding with what's going to be included in the new drug application. So no issues there. And one important thing to understand is that for orphan drugs, one benefit is you typically will only do 1 phase 3 trial instead of having to do 2. And that's indeed what Acadia has done. But our phase 2 trial that we conducted before the deal actually had very similar results. And that now makes that very good supporting evidence, whereas if they'd been completely different, it wouldn't have been such good supporting evidence. So they're actually going to be submitting 2 trials that give a very similar result. And the other thing about the phase 3 trial result was, very robustly positive, no ambiguity, and a lot of consistency. So it's consistent across the age range, consistent across the severity of the disease. So all of that helps, to give a really strong clinical package that they're going to present to the FDA. So we and they feel very good about it. So now let's talk about the economics that I said were coming to us. So when the FDA accepts that application, after that 60 days, we get paid $10 million by Acadia. When the first commercial sale happens after approval, and I expect it to be not long after approval, I don't think there'll be a long gap, we'll get $40 million from Acadia. Then a third element is that with these rare pediatric diseases, an incentive the FDA put in place to make people develop these drugs is to give a priority review voucher. So you get awarded that on approval, and it's not for your product, it's for someone to use on another product, and you can sell these vouchers, and people do sell them. And you'll see them go from anything from 100 million to 300 million. Big companies will pay a lot of money to get them. The last 4, I think, have sold for 100 to 110 million. So we get 1/3 of what Acadia gets under the deal. So that's another $33 million coming to us, and I'll expect that in 2023. So that's nothing to do with sales. Then we get double-digit percentage royalties on all sales, and we can earn up to $350 million in sales milestone payments. So if the product hits certain annual hurdles, we'll get paid a sales milestone payment. Acadia's talked about sales potential here of at least $500 million per annum. So if you think about a double-digit percentage royalty on that, even if it was the lowest double-digit percentage, that's $50 million that would come to us, as a year's royalty. Beautiful thing about all this revenue is there's no cost for us. So we own everything outright. We're not paying anything onto anyone else. So all of this goes straight to pre-tax profit. So you can see that if all this plays out, we're going to be completely transformed from a financial point of view, and some serious cash flow coming in. Let me just talk about ex North America. So the one thing we do know about other countries, including Europe and Japan, there's a need for this drug everywhere. I get bombarded by emails from parents, advocacy groups, even physicians around the world, desperate for something for Rett syndrome for the girls around the world. So there's a lot of demand for the drug. And so not surprisingly, we've had a lot of interest from companies wanting to commercialize trofinetide in those places. So we're now running a process, we're right in the middle of the process now, where we sort of funnel all of that interest down into what's the best outcome for our shareholders. So we're right in the middle of that process. Now, let me just move on to our second drug in NZ-2591. And any of you who've heard me talk before will know I have very high conviction about this drug. I think it can be worth significantly more than trofinetide to us for a few reasons. And probably the fundamental one is a numbers thing. So this is the numbers of patients on this slide, and it's more than 5 times Rett syndrome. So you think about it, I just said, that could be a $500 million product. Well, this is more than 5 times that. And we hold on to global rights to this. And the other thing is, I think, I believe this is not the end of the story for NZ-2591. I think it can treat more than these 4 indications. There's many neurodevelopmental disorders, all with very similar profile and massive need. And I think we may well be able to treat other indications with this drug. So, very excited about the future value for this. The other reason I'm very excited about 2591 is I think we've got a perfect position going into phase 2, which, to be honest, we didn't have that with trofinetide. This is a much better position we've built with 2591. All the data, the manufacturing position, just makes us feel very good about going into these trials. And I'll just mention a few things about these phase 2 trials. And one important thing is Angelman syndrome, which is one of them, is going to happen in Australia. So up to now, all our trials have been done in the US only. So we're actually not very well known in Australia, funnily enough, in the sort of the medical community. But the Angelman syndrome trial is going to be done in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. So we're very excited about that, and hopefully you'll hear more about that in due course. The whole idea of these trials is to get data as quickly as possible that show that the drug works, and then we're going to design registration studies as the step after that. And we're in the great position that we've learned so much from the Rett syndrome program. And these indications are very similar in the way you develop them. We're very proud of some of the stuff we've done in Rett. We're the first people to do anything in Rett syndrome, but we also look back and think there were a few things that we could have done better to get much faster to market. So we're putting all that to bear in these programs, and results in all of them next year in 2023. So we can't wait to see that. We're very excited about these programs. So I'm just going to finish by going back to the milestone slide again. I mean, this I guess is the most important thing for you to take away here, that we have this series of real serious milestone payments here milestones here that can take us to a whole new level. And it's sort of 2 different things. One, generate a very large amount of revenue, as I've gone through. And the second thing is generate a huge amount of additional value from the second drug, which I think will make us very attractive to many companies. And it's all coming together in 2023, so it's not far away, and we just have to execute perfectly along the way to that. So, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, John. Before do we have any questions from anyone here at the moment? We've got one that came in earlier. It's around if you could provide more colour about the licensing of the rights to trofinetide outside of the US. I might just have a bit of a discussion with you on that, just in terms of what do you can you sort of describe that process? I know you had a lot of experience in the team at Aprux in licensing the testosterone Axiron to Eli Lilly. What's your expectations of a deal? How long do you expect that process to take? How many companies do you think you'll be talking to, so forth?
Yeah, so obviously I've got to be a little bit careful here. I'm not going to talk too many specifics, but I'll try and give you a bit of colour. So I said before, we got a lot of interest, and it's a wide variety of interest. So some companies who would be interested in the whole of the rest of the world, some in parts of it, and some in individual countries. So, which is quite a different situation to what we had in the example you're saying. So we've got to try and assess the value in all of this, and do we do multiple deals in different places, or do we do one deal with one partner? So we're running a multi-stage process, and as I said, it's like a funnel, funneling the interest down into what's the most valuable outcome for us. Very happy with the interest. I mean, it's as much interest as I've ever had in a partnering process before. And, I'm hopeful we'll get a good outcome.
And you've just put on Jerry Zhao, who's here to run that, help you run that process.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, very, very delighted to have Jerry.
And what's Jerry's background?
So Jerry's he's an investment banker actually by background, but in healthcare. But he's also done a lot of partnering deals in pharma, and including in consulting work since he left the bank. So very experienced, but he also has a obviously very good understanding of the market, which is very handy as well, and value.
And so, do you think a deal will be done before? I don't want to go into specifics, but yeah, before decision is reached by the FDA on this? Would that help, or would that help accelerate the deal once if Acadia gets approval?
I mean, of course, it would help a deal. And so, are we waiting for that? No. We really want to get going in some of these countries, particularly Europe. There's a whole regulatory process to go through, so we don't want to wait for that. So we're not waiting for that.
Okay,
that's about as far as I'll go on timing. I don't want to.
Yeah. And what about the with trofinetide? On efficacy, it looked great. There were some side effects with respect to I think nausea and diarrhea, that sort of thing. Is that something that the regulator is going to be concerned about, do you think?
So we don't see it as an issue. It's certainly not a safety issue. Maybe a quick bit of background for people. I know some people will know this, but I said, Rett syndrome girls suffer from GI problems, and the classic is serious constipation, chronic constipation, which often results in hospitalization. So it's a serious problem, and they're typically on laxatives. And so what we've got here actually is some diarrhea from taking the drug. So it's sort of flipping it across, and in some ways, that's a lesser problem. I think Acadia is putting in place a management protocol to help deal with it. Certainly haven't been given the feeling from the community that it's a big problem. It's not a safety issue. This is not dehydration, or it's really just a tolerability issue. And compared to the stuff they're dealing with already, we don't think it's a problem, and certainly don't think it's a problem for the regulators.
And in that study, was there a good dose dependency sort of result there?
So it was only one dose group that was tested. So
in the phase 2, you would have tried a few different doses?
So we did 3 different doses, and it was the highest dose that was the effective one, and the other 2 were not. So there was, it was very clear what dose needed to be taken into the phase 3.
Right. And in terms of, so when you did that deal, was that at the end of phase 2?
Yes. So we'd had the end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA.
So the expectations with 2591, is it?
Yep.
That if you get some positive results there, will you be looking at doing deals at the end of phase 2 there?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think I talked about 2023 being this exciting time for us. I think we're going to have multiple options. So, of course, if trofinetide's played out well, we'll have a lot of cash coming in, which means we could choose to continue with phase 3 ourselves if we wanted to.
Pay dividends. It's not get that far.
Yeah, possibly. Or we could partner, or quite conceivably sell the company at that point in time. So we're open to whatever option is the best option for shareholders. We don't need to decide that now. We'll decide that when we see the data and see what interest we've got. Obviously, thinking about all those options in advance, but we're not going to make a decision until then. So.
All right. Good, exciting story. Thanks, John.
Thank
all
you.
Right. Thanks, Megan, today for presenting as well. 2 very good stories there for investors. Thank you for Jeff B. Rice as well, Ian and the team for helping put on this event. And we'll hopefully see you next month in Albury for the BioShare Summit. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.